And good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Double Cross Radio, coming to you live from smoky Southern Oregon. And it's also referred to sometimes as Northern Jefferson. And tonight we are joined by my two co-hosts, Drew Lamb.
Hey, Chuck, how's it going?
Going really great. And Colby Olson.
How's it going, guys?
And we're going to be joined in just a few minutes by our special guest tonight. This is an unplanned show because we didn't have a lot of time to put it together, but I think it's going to be a really good one because there's an emergency happening in this area. It's not a life and death emergency. Well, maybe it is for a couple people, but there's forests on fire here again, as they were last summer at this time. And it seems like the powers that be don't seem to learn from their mismanagement and everything. So we have a special guest on tonight. We're going to have Klamath County Commissioner Dennis Linthicum joining us, and he is a wealth of information on this subject. He has to know everything that's going on as part of his job as a county commissioner, and he's going to fill us in with a lot of pertinent facts. And then he also has the unique view of he has the how can I say this? He has the economic wherewithal to understand what the misdirection of resources, malallocation or misallocation of resources, what kind of destruction that causes in our economy. So I think he's with us now. Is that true, Drew?
Yes, I've connected Mr. Linthicum.
And
Dennis, can you hear us? He is connected to our conversation, and
okay.
Via his Skype, actually. And
really?
So I think he's having some technical problems on his Skype. He didn't phone in because I'm seeing his picture here. Dennis, let's see. I'm going to message you in the console here to see if you're getting audio.
You know, before we had a problem, he had the headphones plugged in.
Yeah, or it was in his preferences. He had a settings issue on his Skype, and then he was able to get.
Well, while he's getting hooked up, I'm going to give everybody some of the information that I dug up today to kind of introduce everybody to this topic. As I said, last summer we had this same problem in a different section of forest. Last summer, that'd be for the entire summer. Usually these fires happen more in the later part of the summer when it dries out completely. But 80,000 acres in southern Oregon, mostly in Josephine County, burned. And while there was some salvage of the lumber that was there, it's basically they destroyed most of it. The politicians get on and they make the people that do the salvage work seem like they're heroes.
Chuck, this seems like a total deja vu.
It is.
I was totally remembering this last year.
Yeah, I was.
We had with the huge fires around Josephine County last year.
Yeah, they were mostly centered there.
Yeah, and it was caused by lightning strikes, of course, like usual in areas where was an abundance of unharvested timber and poorly maintained forests.
And what happens in these fires is because there's so much fuel, they burn a lot hotter than they would if the forests were properly managed. So they don't. They destroy a lot of environmental things. I mean, they burn so hot that the soil gets cooked. The seeds won't resprout. It takes a long time to regrow a forest on these lands. There's too much fuel there. Well, this year we're having deja vu, as Drew pointed out. It's the same situation in just a different area of the forest. This year it's started a little bit east of Ashland, which is just down the road from where Drew's farm is. Probably as the crow flies about 10 or 15 miles, no further than that. And it's been moving southeast from that point of origin. And it was the light show from the lightning that night was just unbelievable, but it started a lot of fires, and they grew together. They created their own weather, and the the wind started moving it in the direction it needed to move and whatever. So up to date, this complex of fires has burned close to 36,000 acres. Now, it was announced as a little bit over 36,000. Now it's a little bit less, and that's just because of errors in mapping. They're trying to estimate as they get more accurate photographs of what's burned and everything, then they get a better picture. I think that number is going to grow, continue to grow. But 36,000 acres is a lot, regardless. And I just got a message from our guest here on phone.
We did actually. I know there was at least one home loss. I think it was they valued that at about $110,000.
Wow, and there were many homes that were evacuated too.
He says he can hear us.
It's showing that his Skype is offline. So
well, he's on his phone. He called in. He can hear us.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
You didn't get a message that the phone was thing.
Yeah, but if you see here, it looks like we're patched into him through Skype because he's added his.
Says he's not on Skype.
Okay. All right. And he can hear us, but we can't hear him.
It's on the phone. So I will.
Let's try hanging him up and have him call again.
Okay.
And
so Dennis can hear us, so just give him the instructions what you want him to do, and then I'll talk while he does this.
Okay, Dennis, just I'm gonna hang up on you, not to be rude, and then call in again. I'm gonna patch you in again and see if that'll help. Okay.
So anyway, just trying to estimate what the value of this timber is. By the way, that land that this year that's been burned, this is an area about twice the size of the city of Medford. I mean, it's 36,000 acres is a lot of acreage. So anyway, it's and Medford is where we live. For those of you who are out there in New York and other places, in Salt Lake City and whatever, it isn't a big city like those places, but it's big around here. And anyway, that normally in a forest, it's been planted and it's in an area that gets good sunlight and has adequate water. They're between.
Let's see if I'm on.
Dennis, you're on.
Okay, very good. Hanging up always works.
Fantastic.
Okay. I was going to finish out here with my estimate of value of these trees that are burning. They're usually somewhere between 1,000 and 1,700 trees per acre, and I base this estimate on the fact that they plant them in 6-foot grids. So there's 6 feet between trees in every direction, and then when they replant to grow the trees, that's pretty much how it is. Not all of them survive. That's why there's a big between 1,000 and 1,700 is the number. Some of them, they're just through competition of the trees. They're in maybe an area that gets too much water or not enough, or they're in a shady spot for too much part of the day. They don't grow very fast, and the other trees take over, and they just kind of, go away or whatever. But there are a lot of trees out here on this land, and the value ranges from about $8,750 to $17,500 per acre. And so if you can see that if you have 36,000 acres burning, that's between $315 million and $630 million worth of trees that burned up. Now, some of them will be salvageable to some extent, and some of that will, those numbers will be reduced somewhat by that amount, but most of them won't be. Now, most of them are just destroyed. And that's also representing just a huge number of jobs that are no longer in Southern Oregon, Northern California. These are just for 3 counties. I'm just talking about Josephine, Jackson, Siskiyou County. Siskiyou's in California, Josephine, and Jackson are in Oregon. And then I guess we could include Klamath Falls, so I think part of it might be burning into Klamath County too, a little bit. And Klamath County has the same problem. They share the same mountain range. Their trees are maybe a little further apart. They have a little different variety that grows on the other side of the mountain, but they have the same problems in that they're not. These forests aren't well managed.
Chuck, let me add to your math and your understanding. What's fascinating about this is if you ran a private business like Collins Lumber and the Berry Point fire that was in Lake County over by Lakeview a year ago, they lost an enormous volume. It was 93,000 acres total burn. And Collins Lumber had nearly 50,000 acres of that land. So National Forest lost a slew of trees. Collins Timber lost a slew of trees. Collins Timber went out and harvested that land and salvaged as much log material as they could. The Forest Service took almost 2 years doing an EIS, an environmental impact study, trying to figure out how they could salvage the land and not harm the real estate. The real estate was already devastated by the fire. The other thing that's weird is Collins had an economic interest in it. The Forest Service basically does not have an economic interest. You and I can do the math, but you'll never notice any ledger anywhere in the federal government that shows they have a loss of X number of board feet of lumber. You will never find them accounting for the missing material. If you were to step into the forest and take some rock or some tree illegally, they would come chasing after you with handcuffs and a sheriff's baton. When they actually burn up millions of acres of real estate, no harm, no foul, no loss on the books, no accounting of it whatsoever, other than you and I recognize the devastation and are sitting here talking about it. Without economic incentives, you can never draw a loop around this because economics is what drives the economy. Economics is what makes decisions in your life. You decide whether you want that cherry pie or that cheap donut based upon your cost and based upon your preferences, and the U.S. government is not influenced by either of those things.
And they really should, because that's ultimately what pays their salaries. I guess now they're resorting to having the Federal Reserve just print money, but
well, yeah, the federal deficit just topped $18 trillion. So that's actually resources that they purchased that they don't have money for. This is a national asset. This is a resource that's going up in smoke, and nobody's even accounting for it. There is no debit or credit on any ledger anywhere in the government to account for this devastation.
Yeah, and combining the two fires that I'm just talking about, the ones that burned in primarily in Josephine County last summer, and the ones that are burning now, they call it the Beaver Complex, I believe. Just those two fires, $1 to $2 billion worth of assets are going to go up in smoke. And, all that timber wouldn't be harvested in 1 year, but if you took this isn't the entire forest around here either. This is just a part of it. But if that was harvested over 20 years, that would amount to $50 to $100 million worth of wealth, and that's really it's wealth. And that wealth is expressed in jobs for loggers and mills and shipping the stuff and everything that's involved with timber harvest. But that'd be $50 to $100 million per year for those three counties. And same thing can be said for the timber that's in Klamath County, but I'd have to enlarge my study a little bit to include them. But that's $50 to $100 million of wealth being generated per year for 20 years. And that's not even the whole forest. That's just the parts that are burned.
Yeah. And the fire suppression costs are enormous. Oregon has enormous resources, on this fire. They've got almost 1,800 men, 14 helicopters. California has 4 dozers and 25 engines. Oregon has 74 engines and 22 dozers, 25 water tenders. And, they have an enormous, almost 1,800 total personnel on the line.
Yeah.
That's money, that's cash flow going out. The U.S. Forest Service 2012 lost 9.3 million acres to forest fire, and during that same period, during that same year, they harvested 200,000. So 9.3 went up in smoke, and 0.2 was harvested for the timber resources. This is obviously an upside-down equation. No private industry would ever imagine this is how you preserve assets for the future of your economy.
Well, we had a record year last year, too. ODF record top-off was $122 million spent, and we burned more than 100 million acres last year. And that doesn't even take into account when we do things like use the National Guard, because although, it might not, I don't know for sure on the figure.
Even if they're using National Guard, those guys get paid a lot of money.
Well, yeah, but I don't even think that I'm not for certain, so don't quote me on this, but I don't think that figure actually would throw in any active duty military personnel that we're using right now, or reserves that have been brought in with their helicopters, which running a Black Hawk or a Chinook in this is very, very expensive money.
Well, over the weekend, I talked to someone who works on these fires, and he makes $250 a day. And so you multiply that by 2,000, that's $500,000 a day. And it's going to burn for a long time. They'll start pulling people off it after a while, but that's a lot of money just in fighting the fire, and that's wealth being destroyed, along with the trees.
Right. Yeah, on some of the smaller fires that we've had over here in Klamath County, it's typically $1,000 an acre in fire suppression costs. So if you have a 1,000-acre fire, it's $1 million. You've got a 35,000 acre, and the bigger the fire, of course, the costs ramp up. But this is a 35,000 acre fire right now in its current state, so it'll be 35 million and rising. This is no way to manage a forest unless you're managing the forest for maximum burn.
Yeah, someone once told me a joke, said if you put the U.S. government in charge of sand in the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And everybody in your listening audience needs to know why. The reason why is because the price incentive is extracted from the model. It's all political incentive. There is no price structure. There is no best use. There is no utility associated with it. It's all political banter that gets that is allocating these resources, spending this money, devastating our landscape. And that's why I ran for Congress. I ran for Congress because we've got to get back into the real world where we pay attention to the numbers and we do the math.
That's right. And before the show started, I was talking to Colby and Drew about something I remember from Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, which if the audience out there, if people haven't read that book, you should read it. It's an awesome read for somebody who's just curious about economics. He doesn't go into a lot of graphs and formulas. In fact, there's almost none of that. Just a couple brief things to show you how things aren't always as they seem. But he's talking about zoning laws and how they turn an economic decision into a political decision, and they divide society, and people now start to try and polarize people to get people to come to support them so they can fight over the land that's been zoned for their particular use. In this case, he was talking about churches fighting over the land that's allocated for a church. It's not enough for everybody that wants to build a church. So they end up having to have a big political dispute over this, and it's not very peaceful at all. Enemies are made, and feelings are hurt, and these are scars that don't heal very fast. And he showed the difference between that and an economic solution where the market is the solution. Everything's a voluntary exchange, and the people get to be where they are, and they want to be accepted in the neighborhood where they build their church, so they try and go around and be good neighbors, and it's just a completely different situation. There's no animosity, there's no bad feelings, and it's so economic decisions are generally ones that lead us to peaceful coexistence with people that have different views. And political solutions, they divide us and polarize us and keep us at each other's throats.
Yeah, you're right. We in economics, we always use examples like that where you can see if you're running the little burger shop, frankly, you don't care if the guy who made the wooden tables and chairs in your burger shop were made by a Hispanic or somebody from South Africa or somebody from the Ukraine. You wouldn't care. What you would want was the product. You'd want to buy that table and chair because it met your economic requirement. It was a place for your customers. You would develop a relationship, and you'd say, I'll buy 3 more chairs next week or next month or whatever. And you frankly don't care who delivers the napkins to your back door. What you need are napkins by Wednesday. And so it's an economic relationship, and it's got nothing to do with all of these political hot buttons that people are so enticed by. And we really need to think about getting on to the playing field where we just create a great working relationship with the guy who's cleaning the dishes or doing the napkins or the waiter in the back room. We create economic relationships because it's good for our business and customers want to come back, not because it's a political requirement and I've got an affirmative action quota to fill. And now that I'm filling that affirmative action quota, the guy who's working there carries a chip on his shoulder and none of the customers are happy, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are economically imposed tragedies that we need to learn to live without.
Yeah. In the case of the fires, the lands could be better managed by other agencies. The BLM was kind of given. And we had earlier this year. We had the situation at the Bundy Ranch, and that's another case. The BLM was given management of a resource, and they've just totally almost destroyed it. They've run almost all the ranchers out of business, and these people had a business that lasted for 100 years. And then suddenly, in the BLM, they found regulations and rules and whatever that just didn't allow anybody to make any money. And they've kind of done the same thing in the forest. They've bent to the political pressure from environmental groups. They've changed the way things have to be done. They've closed down forests because of supposed endangered animals. They've timber sales go on the board, and these groups that are opposed to them can file a lawsuit, injunction, and stop it. And the people have to post a bond to bid on these sales, and they just don't want to even bid on them anymore because they never get their bond back. I mean, it's just they forfeit it because they don't ever log it because it never gets cleared out of court, and it's just. The whole thing is so poorly managed. I don't think you could do a better job of ruining an industry if you tried to do it. And
we've also got another issue going on right now with it. I know that they did it out in Klamath Falls just recently, I saw, and then out in Gold Hill, the irrigation districts are shutting off the water. Here, to make some pipeline in order to save fish, and over there, obviously, because of the water rights issue that he knows about. But, I mean, during a peak fire season like this, it's not a good idea to do that either. And we're having mismanagement in multiple directions from the way I'm looking at it. I'm pretty sure you guys would agree with that.
Actually, you guys can correct me. In your area, who was it? Mr. Harrington had the pond where he was collecting rainwater. He spent 30 days in the slammer, and the Forest Service was dipping their helicopter buckets into his pond, and Oregon Department of Water Resources came and blew his pond apart. And now the Forest Service can't dip in that pond anymore. So here's what we call what? Wisdom or stupidity?
Or power madness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know why it's like Lucy pulling the football out when Charlie Brown's running up there to kick it, and he pulls it out of the way, and so he falls on his back, and it happens every year. And he never learns. And he says, "This year I'm not going to do it." Well, I'm going to go ahead and trust, or I'm going to go ahead and try it. And then she pulls the football. And does it. It's the government is always messing things up. I don't know why we continue to trust them. It's maybe Charles Schulz had a lot more wisdom about things like that than we give him credit for. That seems so appropriate to how the government works.
It's kind of similar to the other thing that I really didn't get into understanding as much until I heard Dennis speak when he was running for Congress. The issue with the dams. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys might know something I don't. But when the dams hold water behind them and it evaporates, it kind of creates a greenhouse effect, which actually feeds clouds that are overhead with precipitation, and then they drop it back on the ground. It creates an ecosystem. That's how it works, correct?
It can.
Yeah, it can. All the open ditches provide evaporation rate. If you put all those ditches in inside tubing or inside enclosed tunnels or pipe, you will lose that evaporative process. But once you go to sprinkle that, pressurize that and sprinkle it on the landscape or flood irrigate with gated pipe, then you'll put it out into the environment and it will evaporate. The big difference is whether you're going to use the fresh water. The Klamath Basin really uses an extremely small percentage, and most of the water that we use for irrigation ends up back in the water table. Because it either evaporates or it goes back into the soil and seeps into the aquifer, and very little actually gets extracted and used in plant material and plant fiber. So it is a great big closed loop system. What we're trying to do is argue for freshwater storage instead of turning it into salt water by the end of the afternoon. When you let that water spill down into the ocean without ever utilizing it for any given stated purpose, then what you're doing is saying we've got enormous volumes, thousands of acre feet of fresh water, and what we're going to choose to do with it is make salt water out of it, and we think that's the best use. And when you put it in those terms, the light bulb goes on, and people go, really? I thought fresh water was a precious resource. And then you go, bingo, it is a precious resource. Let's manage it like it's precious.
Yeah, and it's this is something that those of you who are listening to this that live east of the Mississippi River, you live in a very wet environment. It's as I fly over in an airplane, I see lakes and rivers everywhere. It's very moist there. There's as you come west, it gets drier, and then as you go past the Rocky Mountains, it gets real dry. There's the only part that's wet on the West Coast is right along the coastline. And
and then once you cross the Cascades, then you're into the wet zone again. So between the Rockies and the Cascades, it's typically dry. And then once you get on the west side of the Cascades, it's the wettest place in North America. Yeah, so
that's kind of we live in the people on the east side of those Cascades are in a big rain shadow, and they don't get a lot of precipitation. And it's really a precious resource, and it's very scarce. Really, there's a lot of land out here that nobody lives on because it's too dry. And if you fly over it, you'll see that there's just nobody there. So anyway, this is the second year in a row, and I was started to mention this back in, I think it was in 1976 that BLM they reorganized how they managed things, and they changed a lot of the rules in the forest, and it didn't really things started to change. We had environmental stuff about the spotted owl and everything, but during the Reagan presidency, a lot of harvesting of the forest began to take place again, and he had a new Secretary of the Interior. I think his name was Watt, if I remember correctly, and he was responsible for opening up the forests again and getting some mills in business, and it was kind of a prosperous time for Southern Oregon. There's a lot of log trucks coming down the roads, and I don't remember seeing any huge swaths of destroyed land like I see today when it's all burned to a crisp. When they would go through and they would harvest timber and they would cut out the mature trees, they'd go back and replant, and in about 10 years it looks like a forest again. They might be smaller trees, but it doesn't take long for it to grow back. When we have a fire and they burn as hot as they burn today, it takes a lot longer than 10 years to have trees growing there again. And in the meantime, you have a lot of environmental degradation from the erosion, the material washing down in the streams that ruins the salmon spawning habitats, and there's just a lot of bad things that are associated with these fires. And we really need to, if we had somebody that was managing a business that was losing $1 to $2 billion worth of assets every 2 years, we'd fire them. So we need to fire the government and start managing these lands ourselves. There's a lot of really I don't know how to say it, full foresters out there that have been trained in this business, and they've worked in this field for 30 years, 20 to 30 years, that are out there that know how to manage a forest and know how it should be done, and nobody listens to them because everything comes from Washington, D.C., and some bureaucrat behind a desk that probably wouldn't know a tree from a bush. And to me, it's just beyond our imagination that we continue to let this happen, and then nobody's really standing up. I know Dennis stands up and says things about it, but I know our own county commissioners, they want to keep getting that money from the federal government so they don't put up too much resistance or say, when they're not being recorded or it's off the record, they'll tell you what they really think, but they don't dare speak up because they don't want to lose. They're on that welfare system now, and they don't want to be cut off from that welfare system. They think that that's their job is to get their share of the federal largesse that gets passed out. And so here we are. We're stuck in this untenable situation, and the people have to start doing something about it, because we can't rely on our elected officials always to do the right thing. They're trying to what they think is the best for the county. I don't agree with them, and we have to point out to them why they're wrong and how much this is really costing us, or it's costing us literally fortune.
Well, actually, let me comment on that. As a county commissioner, I challenged the current sitting Congressman Greg Walden in the primary, and I was defeated in the primary. And the reason I ran is exactly what you're describing. But let me describe what the reason there's this big separation is. You're using incentives that are based on common sense and economics and supply and demand and valuing the resource. Your local politician doesn't use any of those to make decisions. What he goes to when he goes to value a decision is, what does it do for me politically? So he's using an entirely different system to weigh the pros and the cons. He's not using economics. He's using electoral politics, and he's deciding what his future will look like. And that's the tragedy that America has come to know in our modern political arena, is the people who can use government to legislate their way to profitability are fully engaged in utilizing that methodology because it's easy. Can you imagine having to go compete in the marketplace? Can you imagine having to be on your toes? Can you imagine always having to strive for better customer service and better results and faster this and smaller that, when you could instead legislate your way to the top of the heap by, talking to your local representative? He then signed some legislation, they create an industry, they provide subsidy, they give tax credits, and they incentivize this kind of, rampant piracy where all the people who are really doing and working are paying the bill for those people who are sitting back on their fannies. It's a tragedy of enormous proportions, but the reason it doesn't make sense is we're using one methodology to put value on the equation, and your local politician or elected representative is using an entirely different format. It's a different equation. Different numbers fall into the hopper, and of course the results come out different as well.
Yep. And Dennis is in the belly of the beast, so he's the authority on this and at our show, and he's seen this up close and personal. He's, as I said, he is a sitting commissioner in Klamath County. I wish he was in Jackson County, but I think we've recently had a clear thinker elected or at least in their primary, in Colleen Roberts. I'm pretty sure she's going to win. I don't think she's running opposed right now. I don't think the Democrats fielded anybody to go against her. They think that she's going to win, I guess. So they're going to try and knock off the other guy because they think he's more vulnerable. And I think that's probably a good strategy. But anyway, I think they had one candidate that won both primaries, and she chose to go against the other guy. Whatever, I don't know. It's politics. I don't pay too much attention to it.
Actually, Colleen won the Democrat.
She won the Democrat primary too.
She hasn't. Yeah, she won the Republican and Democrat primary, but I think she has an independent write-in candidate now.
Okay. Well, that's and I don't think that guy has much, or whoever it is. I don't think they have much of a chance. I'm not keeping up too much on that, and there's a good chance that we will elect another commissioner for this other seat that's up, and we'll get two people in there, Colleen and the other person that really have some common sense behind them and aren't. They won't be swayed by all the money that's available if you just do what they want you to do, and instead of doing what's best for Southern Oregon. But I'm not going to hold out a lot of hope on that.
That race is extremely difficult, actually. There's a Libertarian, there's Rick Dyer, there's a Democrat also, and then there's Kurt Chancellor's turned in all his signatures, so he should be on the ballot as well.
Yeah, they just have to be verified, right? So, yeah, that's going to be an interesting one politically. I'm just I hope whatever comes out after we get a little better government here. But I'm like I said, I'm not holding my breath. In the meantime, there are things that people that are living in this area, in this region, that are listening to this broadcast, you have to keep bringing these facts, this information that we have on the show. I mean, this is on a podcast. You can play this for your friends and neighbors. This information, you need to share it with people if you think it's valuable, if you think it's worthwhile. And we need to start putting pressure on these people, letting them know that they're not doing the right thing. We need to. There's movements afoot. Siskiyou County just narrowly missed withdrawing from the state of California, becoming an independent republic. The vote was 55% to 45%. That was a pretty narrow loss, I think, for a first time, and for the kind of grassroots campaign that it was. I thought that was pretty amazing that it was that close. And that means that a lot of people have to be convinced for this, kind of thing. Siskiyou County is pretty close to at that point where they can make that new venture out into something where they have a little more authority over what happens in their lives, and they can start getting some of their economy back. They've lost, and I think all the counties in Southern Oregon share this with Siskiyou County, although maybe not quite as bad, that they've lost 28%, all but 28% of their economy. So that's 72% of their economy is gone from 20 years ago. 72% of the production of wealth that was there in Siskiyou County has vanished. And that's just not right. And it's vanished because of rules and regulations and fights in court over things because of poor management. And they took something that was working fairly well, and people had a decent life here. You could make a family living, a living that could support a family on one income, and you didn't have to have a college education to do it. And this was a nice place. We weren't burning down our forests every year. We had a beautiful environment to live in, And there were fires occasionally, but they weren't like they are now. We didn't have the valley filled with smoke for a month on end like we did last summer. It's like a way of life has disappeared, and we let it disappear. And so it's time we say, hey, especially those of you who are old enough to remember what it was like in the 60s and 70s and early 80s. It was nothing like this. All this has happened in the last 20 years. And those of you who are younger, you can go back and you can ask your parents and your grandparents what it was like, and they'll tell you they don't remember ever having a summer where the whole valley was just filled with smoke for months on end. And I remember that in early 2000. It was horrible for about 45 days of just smoke, and they said it wasn't going to go out. The fires weren't going to go out until we got a rainstorm. Well, we had dry periods back in the 60s and 70s. I remember a summer where it didn't rain for over 120 days, and we never had fires like this. They had lightning strikes in the mountains, and fires would start up and they'd put them out. And they didn't burn this hot, and they didn't get this big because they managed the forest properly. And it's a matter of the people that are doing the job are not doing a good job. We need to fire them. We need to take this back and manage it ourselves. And there are people that are out there in the forest that have the knowledge and the wisdom. They can get it done. They understand what needs to be done, how it should be done. They've got the experience from those times before when it was properly managed, and they can teach the younger people all their knowledge that they have, and we can do away with this destruction of wealth. And that's really what it is. It's billions of dollars that this area, this region, does not have going up in smoke. And gosh, I look at all the people out there that are on welfare and food stamps, and we have petty crime, and there's drug abuse and alcoholism, and all these things, all these problems get diminished when people go to work. And a lot of the things that you think you need money for crime and health care and all this, all those problems, they get smaller if people go to work. So that's the end of my rant for that, I guess.
Well, you mentioned welfare. I got a ticker that showed that $2,7,358,200,000,200. It's a hard number to read. There are so many stinking zeros. I'll read it in decimal format. Your listeners can write it down. 2,007,358,000,000 for pennies, right? $2 trillion went to benefit. 60% of every nickel the federal government spent last year went out the door in some sort of benefit. Remember, their entire outlay was $3.4 trillion. A little over $2 trillion went out in form of benefits. So at some point, this is clearly unsustainable. And if we're not going to extract resources from our natural environment, my question to your listeners is, where are you going to get it from, right? Even if you have an idea that says, I like the cool, sleek, modern architecture, you got to get steel and concrete from somewhere. If you like wind turbines, you've got to get steel, concrete, and copper wire from somewhere. Where are you going to get that from? Your listeners probably don't realize I've lived off the grid for 18 years. Diane and I have had our home far enough away from the nearest electric pole that we've had a solar installation for 18 years. Everybody ought to be fully aware that the useful life of a solar installation is 20 years. That means you've got to start thinking about replacing these things every 18 years or so. I actually replaced mine at the 12-year mark just to avoid running into a time crunch. I could still sell my old stuff on eBay to a guy who had a cabin in the woods, and he was happy as a clam to pick up a cheap installation, install it himself over a couple of weekends, and run his little cabin. this a perfect swap for him, and it allowed me to invest in new technology. But can you imagine the United States of America trying to defund itself from coal, to cut the umbilical cord from base power generation, and sticking solar all over, the planet by square mile after square mile after square mile, and then, like every night at my place, the sun goes down. So what do you do overnight? Now you need to have stored that energy, manage that resource, put it into a chemical form in a battery so that you can draw it out in the middle of the night. You can't run industry on that. You can't make steel on that. You can't make an iPhone on that. You can't create computers, technology, or flat-screen TVs without base power production. And we have fallen into the trap of thinking everything that man does has to be gentle to planet Earth. And I disagree. We can use planet Earth in a wise fashion. We can manage these fires. We can manage our forests. We can manage our hydroelectric generation facilities. We can mine coal in a legitimate fashion and take care of the Earth. Most of the time when a coal mine is completed, they put the top bill back on it and replant it. I mean, it's beautiful once the coal mine operation is finished. This is the way we ought to be thinking about planet Earth, because if you don't get your natural resources from the planet, where are you going to get them from? And there's no other solution. You have to be willing to extract resources in a logical, prudent, and wise fashion.
That's exactly correct. If we don't use energy, we're going to be living in mud huts. That's all there is to it. It's energy gives your labor
Chuck,
more value because you produce more.
I want to live in a mud hut.
Well, I know you do. You're going to
awesome.
Earthship. But you want to live in a luxury mud hut.
And I'd like to have some solar. Yeah, we need to get Dennis on my new Off-Grid Journey show on Sundays.
Yeah, he's a living example of how you do it. But it comes with costs. I mean, there's a lot of costs in making the panels, all the equipment, the battery storage units. It's just, those are things that are all have an impact on the environment too. And there's a lot of people out there that are just not seeming to be much aware of that. I remember hearing stories of people saying, well, how much energy electric cars would save, not realizing that the energy for the cars has to come from somewhere too. And
yeah, right. That's always the trick, huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if you can just snap,
You know what?
And they say, it just all you have to do is plug it into the socket in the wall, and they don't even realize that has to be generated somewhere either.
You see these little clown cars buzzing around Ashland all over the place, and these smug people driving them, and they're all electric, and I'm like, you have to get that energy off the grid. That has to be produced in some way. If you're here, it's probably hydroelectric, so you need to keep those dams in place.
Right.
Yeah, and
I went to we toured a photoelectric manufacturing facility. It's in Salem, Oregon, and they actually draw the silicon out and slice it to create the wafers that go onto a solar panel. What they do after they draw the crystal out, it's a 24-hour-a-day process, real slow. I think it takes like 5 or 6 days to draw a single crystal. Then they use a cable saw to cut it into microfine, wafers. They package those wafers and they freight them to Japan. Japan assembles them onto what you and I recognize as a solar panel, with each of those little squares being one of those wafers that came out of this facility in Salem, Oregon. Then Japan puts those solar panels on a freighter and freights them back to the United States. And then we buy them and say, oh, this is wonderful. Look at the low impact that this is having on planet Earth. that photo plant, that crystal plant, consumes 4.5 megawatts of energy every single month, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Where would they get power from if it was based on wind energy or solar energy? It wouldn't be there. You've got to rely on a base load coming from coal, coming from hydro is the cheapest, maybe gas turbine, maybe geothermal or nuclear, but you cannot do it with what everybody is infatuated with, which is solar energy and wind energy. It's just not, you can't accomplish the goal you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and despite the really pretty ad that comes on TV once in a while about my mommy is learning how to make electricity from under the ocean or whatever, they're using tides, that has a limited amount of energy is ever going to be generated that way. It might serve a small town of 50 or something at the best. It's not going to serve a lot of people. It's a very small contribution to our total energy needs. The alternate energy sources are alternate for a reason.
Yeah, at our house, Diane has restless leg syndrome, so I put her on the bicycle, and she keeps the lights on.
There you go. That'll work. So I don't want to let you leave tonight before I mention this. Citizens for Transparent Government, that's Eric Dubin's organization, and he's the one that kind of helped us get this put together tonight, so thank you, Eric. And Americans for Prosperity, they're putting on an event August 12th, and this is going to be at the Medford Main Library, and the title of this is going to be a presentation. It's called Death of America by Consensus, and one of the featured speakers is going to be our guest tonight, Dennis Linthicum, along with Mr. X, who is a frequent caller into KMED, I believe. In our audience, I'm sure that Miner Dave knows who Mr. X is. I don't get a chance to listen to the radio so much in the morning anymore. I'm busy trying to put stuff up for our Facebook page and read stuff and get hold of guests for future shows and stuff. So whatever. But this is coming up, like I said, August 12th. It's going to be 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Medford Library. And I'd urge anybody within, I'd say, an hour drive of Medford to attend. This is going to be an awesome presentation and probably well worth your time. What else are you going to do on Tuesday night in August?
Watch the lightning storms and the forest fires.
Yeah, you can do that. And then I also want to remind everybody, I keep forgetting to do this, and I tune in to Drew's program. He has a new program on Sunday mornings at 11
a.m. Pacific.
Yes, and it's called Off Grid Journey, and he has some fabulous guests, and he talks at length of the things he's doing in his farm, and I didn't get to listen to the last couple of weeks, so I fell behind. We were camping.
That's okay. Last week. I ran a rerun last week. I needed to take a little time off, but I had a lot of good feedback on my first episode, so I replayed that, and I cover aquaponics, of course, on that episode. And I've got Matt Stein, the author of When Tech Fails and When Disaster Strikes, lined up later this month. And also I got an email from Jorge Cervantes, who says that he would like to come on. I didn't invite him on. He contacted me. He's the guy who literally wrote the book on growing marijuana. So that should be interesting. I'm trying to get him scheduled out.
Yes.
And
that'll put you on a list.
Yeah. Oh, I'm on all the lists, I'm sure. I don't even worry about it anymore. This week, I want to get into some insect technology, one of my favorite topics, and I'm hoping that my brother Nathan is going to join me. He owns Ladybug Indoor Gardens and Nature's Control, and they sell beneficial insects and a lot of other things. But I want to get into how we use insects in farming and gardening, and from composting to pollination to pest control. And so I want to start getting into that. I've been doing a lot of research on the black soldier fly for the past over 2 years, almost 2.5 years now. And I use them for composting, and then I generate fish feed from the black soldier fly larva.
And it really help keep the flies down in his place.
Well, it does actually, because they drive away the domestic household flies. And the black soldier flies aren't pests, and they don't spread vectors, and they're very beneficial, and they don't like human habitats. I actually have a composting unit that I designed out on my patio at my house right here right now, and we put our kitchen food scraps in there. I primarily just put vegetable scrap in there, and I just give them enough to eat, so it doesn't smell bad. And actually, it's about 6 feet from our patio table where we eat dinner when we're outside, and it doesn't emit any odors, and we haven't had any problems with flies since I put it out there, because they want to avoid the black soldier flies because they can't compete with them. But anyways, I've developed a product that you could use to inoculate your compost bin with black soldier fly larvae if you want to get started with this. And so I'm going to be working on a little download handout thing so that you can learn how to cultivate the black soldier fly to raise for aquaculture feed or chicken feed, and or just to process your food scraps like you would with worms. And
there's a lot of people around here that have horses.
Mm-hmm. They'll process manure.
Just dumping getting a colony started in your manure pile will really help keep your flies down.
My very first customer was Parducci Cellars down in Ukiah, California, and they're experimenting with the black soldier fly for processing their grape pomace. And if it works out for them, they'll basically be converting that pomace into protein, and then they'll feed the black soldier fly pupa to their chickens. They raise organic chickens, and they do a lot of organic farming over there. But they'll be using their waste stream to transform that material into protein. And so that was huge. So I've developed this product, and if you're interested in purchasing it, you could contact me, Drew, at pyramidpurefoods.com.
Yeah, and we need to keep mentioning this, because this is a lot better than using pesticides and things that you spray out there that you don't want to get in your food supply. And I've been there; it works. They're amazing little animals, these black soldier flies. Anyway, we're drawing to the close of our time. The music's going to start in a minute. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You were awesome. And,
very good, thank you. And I'll see all you guys on Tuesday, right?
Yes. I want to see some other people from our audience on Tuesday as well. Good night, everybody. Thanks for listening.